What does it mean for a pro wrestler to have heat, to be over to get a push? And does any of this guarantee success? Find out today on the Dr. Wrestling Podcast. Hi there and welcome to the Dr. Wrestling Podcast. This is your host, Barry Johnson. We'll be leading you through the idea of heat in professional wrestling. What does it mean for a wrestler to have heat, to be over, to get a push? And in the end, does it matter? Does it give them success? And exactly what does that mean? So first, let's get a couple of definitions out of the way. The wrestling term for heat basically is the ability to generate a reaction from the crowd. Now, there's lots of different kinds of reactions you can generate. Sometimes that's cheers, sometimes that's boos, sometimes you get what I like to call love from the fans, and sometimes you get genuine hate from the fans. And the strange thing is sometimes wrestlers can get both at the exact same time. But the key factor to heat is that any kind of heat is better than no heat. The last thing you want to hear when a professional wrestler is standing in the ring is crickets. And there's quite a few folks on the roster right now who are facing that exact same problem in every organization, particularly in WWE. So it really comes down to fan preference, fan respect, fan appreciation for what a wrestler brings to the table. And to a casual fan, that can be very confusing. A lot of fans think that professional wrestling boils down to a very simple comparison of good guys versus bad guys, and that they basically just need to learn who they're supposed to cheer and who they're supposed to boo. On an elemental level, there really is a lot to be said for that in professional wrestling. However, it's very much the case that the business is more nuanced and complex than that, particularly in this day and age. Whenever wrestling was still presented as legitimate competition, both inside and outside the normal television shows, it was much easier to work on the presumption that you were supposed to cheer or boo every given person, and you kind of did what you were told. It's even been the case before that wrestling organizations, when they were filming television tapings, such as WCW in the mid-1990s, literally had signs up inside the area where they were taping to tell fans whether they were supposed to boo or cheer, almost as though they were a studio audience in a sitcom. Those days are long gone. In modern professional wrestling. Hopefully they are gone for good. Wrestling has a very prominent and very demanding fan base, in no small part because of the power of the internet, because of the power of information that it provides. Wrestling is a much more open business than it used to be. The premise of a given wrestler being a good guy or a bad guy tends to be a little bit more of a gray area, but most of all, the fans are much more intelligent when it comes to whether they should boo or cheer a given star. And they usually do that not based on whether they fall into the typical good guy or bad guy category. They do it based on their individual perception of that wrestler and their work, their presentation. To casual fans, this can be very confusing, but to long-term fans, not only is it important to understand which wrestlers are supposed to be booed and cheered, it's very important that the fans have the right to boo and cheer who they wish. And now, more than ever, it falls on the promotions to listen to what the fans are telling them on a day-to-day basis and to adjust their plans accordingly. Because ultimately, the fans who follow wrestling closely enough and care enough to tune in every week, to attend the live events, to take part and voice their opinions, both verbally, with their dollars, with their ratings, and ultimately supporting the business. Those are the fans that I believe the companies, the promotions, would be best off listening to and catering to. We'll get a little bit more into the details of that later. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Dr. Wrestling Podcast. I want to take a moment and say thank you to one of our sponsors, SilverWerks.net. SilverWerks produces handmade, one-of-a-kind, unique jewelry, silver, copper, and brass. Every piece handmade by the artist. There's something there for everybody on your list, so give them a look. SilverWerks.net. That's SilverWerks.net. SilverWerks Uncommon Goods. All right, we're back, and we're discussing heat in professional wrestling, how a wrestler gets heat, and what kind of reaction they can hope to generate. The 4 basic types of heat that a wrestler can get are boos, cheers, love, and hate. And right now we're going to break down some examples of boos. By boos, I mean the kind of reaction that the crowd gives a wrestler when they don't like something that they do in the ring, when they think they're being unfair. To start off, let's discuss some of the traditional heel tactics, and not just in professional wrestling, but in movies, TV shows. Traditional heel tactics would be things such as arrogance, selfishness, cheating, stabbing a friend in the back, insulting the local fans or hometown, local sports teams, cowardly behavior, backing away from a fight, using money or power influence to get their way, to succeed, or to ensure an outcome. And sometimes, quite frankly, just being foreign or unattractive in a way can help someone become a heel and therefore get over with boos. Examples of that in the current WWE landscape would include Sheamus. He is foreign, but more importantly, he is selfish. He routinely goes out of his way to emphasize that he doesn't do what he does for the fans, he does it for himself, and will frequently cheat in the process. The Brian Kendrick is a notorious schemer and someone who will stab a friend in the back to achieve his goal. Ric Flair is an immensely successful and prolific professional wrestler, probably the best on the WWE women's roster right now, and very deserving of that accolade across such a short period of time. She will routinely insult fans and make it very clear that she doesn't need or want their admiration, despite when they demonstrate the respect for what she performs in the ring. So she gets booed quite handily by the crowd. And lastly, certainly but not least, Rusev. He is foreign, he is aggressive, he is mean-looking, he comes out with a beautiful wife, and they both antagonize the crowd on a regular basis. So these are very traditional heels in the pro wrestling landscape, and they fulfill their roles very well. Historical characters, long-standing characters who have fulfilled this kind of role. First, Ric Flair, the embodiment of arrogance. He presented himself as above everybody else, better than everybody else at every turn, and cheated when he had to, would insult the crowd if he had to, but he was a master of controlling the crowd and getting everyone to react to him the way he needed. And that was both as a heel and a babyface. Another great example is Jerry Lawler. He didn't have as much opportunity to do that on a national scale, but Lawler was a master heel in the territories where he worked and his own promotions in Memphis. So very, very accomplished heel in his time. The Honky Tonk Man, Wayne Ferris. I'm not sure there's been too many wrestlers in WWE history to ever generate the kind of hatred that he generated when his gimmick basically boiled down to an Elvis impersonator who was so arrogant and convinced of his superiority that he was blind to how much he was hated for it. The $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, the epitome of using influence and money to try to control everyone, all the way down to buying the WWF World title. And to throw in an example of a gentleman who got over as simply for being foreign, the Iron Sheik. He was from Iran, legitimately an Olympic athlete, and at the time, that kind of presence in the United States was not very welcome. So in addition to being a very good wrestler and in having a tremendous physique, he was also hated by the fans for being from a place that was perceived as our enemy at the time here in America. By comparison, let's take a look at the more traditional good guy, the person who gets cheered. Guys who fight for what they believe in, who defend their honor and the honor of others, who try to be respectful and fair in their efforts, who don't back down from a fight, who shy away from corruption and turning their back on their friends. They're willing to work and earn things the hard way. They try to be appreciative of the fans and demonstrate respect. These are the traditional good guys, baby faces in pro wrestling. Current examples are Bayley. She is perceived as somewhat innocent, maybe a little bit naive, but incredibly popular both with a young crowd and with adults. Somebody that you wouldn't feel bad about a child looking up to and respecting, modeling themselves after. Sami Zayn, a tremendous underdog who is very charismatic, an amazing worker in the ring, sells like crazy. I mean, one of the best sellers in the business today, and can have a great match with just about anybody you could put him in there with. Small, large, it doesn't matter. And we'll go with Enzo and Cass, a great tag team WWE brought up from NXT in 2016. They are so charismatic. They're good in the ring, and they're one of my favorite teams on the landscape right now. But they're just so charismatic and funny that you can't help but love them. Not everyone does, but man, do they move some merchandise and put some butts in some seats. Classic examples, legends of the business, who were traditional baby faces and pretty much remain that way their entire careers. Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. I'm not sure if they ever even tried to turn Steamboat heel in professional wrestling, but if they did, I'm sure it didn't last very long. Steamboat was such a likable guy. He was so accomplished in the ring. He was so capable. His trilogy of matches with Ric Flair deserved their own podcast. It was such a legendary trilogy of matches. Just 3 among probably 1,000 that the two wrestled against each other across their great careers. He had such an amazing physique. Women loved him because he was a very attractive guy, had a very Polynesian look that was different but not necessarily foreign. And he was just such a likable person that you couldn't help but cheer for him. Another great long-term example of a babyface was Sting. He was a heel when he first started out in the business, but very quickly he was turned face, and since then the fans identified with him. Back then he was the surfer with the spiked blonde hair and the face paint, but kids and adults alike identified with Sting and really supported him at every turn. Yes, everyone has their peaks and valleys as far as support goes, but long term, there are a few people who had the fan base that Sting carried with him throughout his years in the business. And his retirement in WWE after such a short time there proves that he established himself as one of the most prominent baby faces of a long era, including 3 decades. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. I want to take a moment and send a shout out to our friends Keith and Kevin Davis and thank them for the use of their song Bounce, which you hear at the beginning and ending of each podcast. Thanks, guys. We're back talking about pro wrestlers getting heat and the types of heat that they can hope to generate in the crowd. Next, we're going to talk about love. And I distinguish this from cheers. The reaction that you can get from fans when you're the good guy and doing the good guy bit is always a positive reaction to receive from the crowd. But love is something different. Some examples of this would be people who have generated respect from the crowd. People who have paid their dues or are just so good at some aspect of what they do that the fans simply pay them the respect that they feel is owed, not because of winning championships, not because of the way they look or their physique, but because they feel that they earn it on a level beyond the character or storyline that they happen to be a part of at the moment. Some examples of this on the current wrestling scene are The Undertaker. The man has been a part of the business for over 30 years, but he's been a part of the WWE landscape for over 26 years. When he came in, many people thought the gimmick was silly, thought it was almost cliche, and at a time when WWE or WWF at the time was starting to present everyone as having a day job somewhere else. The Undertaker seemed like a very silly gimmick. But across the years, Mark Calaway took that character in different directions to move with the times. He became more sadistic when their product became a little bit more extreme and a little bit darker in the late 1990s. He took it to the American badass biker gimmick to stay relevant with the times. He has morphed it on a number of different occasions to include mixed martial arts when that became prominent on the scene, and eventually took it back to becoming the Lord of Darkness and the Dead Man focus, more traditionally back to what he was at the beginning of the character. So if you look at his sheer longevity in the business and the impact that he has when he walks on screen, there are very few people who can hold a candle to the timeless impact that he has on their programming. Just the mention of his name will pop bigger ratings for WWE. And if you look at the quality of matches he's had across the years, never mind the streak that he had at WrestleMania, it's hard to find anybody who's had a bigger impact across that time. To go with someone a good bit younger, we'll look at Shinsuke Nakamura, NXT at the current time, and absolutely a phenomenal talent in the ring. I personally was unfamiliar with his work before he arrived in NXT, but since then I have certainly become familiar with it, and I understand very clearly why so many people have so much great respect for the man. He's extremely charismatic, despite the language barrier, and his physical movements, his interaction with the crowd has such a big impact on the program that it's really hard to imagine a crowd that wouldn't react to him, to imagine a crowd that would be sitting on their hands instead of supporting him and cheering for him. Never mind the quality of matches that he has in the ring. So he's definitely someone who brings a lot to the table, and the crowd reacts accordingly. Also in NXT at the current time, Bobby Roode. He's an extremely talented wrestler. He started out as someone who was very good in the ring, a great hand, but not necessarily all that charismatic on the microphone. He has certainly worked very hard to improve his charisma. But in the end, the help of a good run in TNA, Impact Wrestling, added to a very impressive and catchy entrance theme, has led to an opening that is almost an occurrence, almost a happening whenever it happens on a NXT episode. And at their takeover events, it is basically a spectacle in and of itself to watch his entrance. An example on the main WWE roster that we should definitely mention here is Chris Jericho, Y2J. Not only has Jericho been prominent on the pro wrestling scene in North America for the past 20 years, he is an incredible Renaissance man in that he can work with just about anybody. He can work almost any style of match. He can successfully put someone over, whether they're a good guy or a bad guy. He can have a great match with just about anybody. He gets it. He understands the point of the business. And even in house shows, he is so charismatic and can work so little to generate such a strong reaction from the crowd that he's obviously a master of the craft. He comes onto WWE television every week and always has something to do that cements his place as a heel. But when his entrance hits, many fans cheer because they are excited to see someone who is so good at what they do and someone who gets the business so well come onto their screen because they know they're about to be entertained. Even if he does something underhanded, evil, backstabbing, whatever it is, they know they're going to see a good show, and that's why they love Jericho. The phenomenal AJ Styles. In just a short year's time, he came from never having been in WWE with any prominence, world champion and recurring champion all over the world, an absolutely astounding wrestler who had started out as an amazing in-ring performer, not so great and charismatic on the mic. Again, he upped his game. He has established in the past few years why he is such a valuable commodity in pro wrestling, and he has dominated WWE's landscape since he's been there. So He's someone who the fans legitimately respect and adore for everything he brings to the table. And I think a lot of fans really respect the fact that he did all of that without WWE, without their publicity machine, without that competition. Now that he is so professional, so well-rounded, so capable, and he's in the WWE, they now have this wealth of dream matches, this wealth of opponents that he can face to try to live out some of those matches, and it makes for one entertaining show after another. Even in a more mundane and routine match, look at what he did with James Ellsworth. He took someone who was a jobber, someone who has generated a lot of babyface heat, a lot of sympathy for his looks, for being unattractive. He is a very sympathetic character. AJ played the foil to him. He routinely berated him and belittled him, beat him up physically. But they made Ellsworth a star to the point where fans would pay for a t-shirt with a jobber's face on it and pay to see him wrestle in the main event of television shows. AJ was the bad guy that brought the best out in James Ellsworth, and he continues to do the same with everyone he faces on the SmackDown roster. Another example is Bray Wyatt. Despite not getting a strong push in quite a while, Wyatt has a magnetic personality. And as you see his renegade or rebellious nature spread throughout the crowd and throughout the fan base across the months, everyone has their phones or their lighters up whenever he comes in to create his Firefly entrance. Everyone cares about Bray Wyatt being on the show. Everyone thinks about his character and wants to be a part of that. His gimmick is very thought-provoking. It's very deep, which is quite frankly not a common thing in professional wrestling. But he is the kind of personality that can bring that aspect of it out. The creepy angle of what he does also is very intense for fans and something that draws a lot of attention. And all of this despite the fact that, as much as everyone may like and respect him, he doesn't have the traditional pro wrestler physique. It's more of an everyman. Finn Balor, the Demon King, comes to NXT and now WWE after many years of working around the world, earned a reputation under his real name somewhat, Fergal Devitt, Prince Devitt, and he has absolutely torn things up in NXT and WWE. He is an absolutely amazing talent. He is very, very charismatic. Took a chance with these ideas about the Demon character, and it really resonated with the fans. So even when he's not wrestling as the Demon, he still gets that kind of reaction and following. But his entrance as the Demon is an absolute spectacle. It is something that people will tune in just to watch the entrance. Never mind that he delivers a great match afterwards. And he's extremely flexible in the ring to be able to work with nearly any type of opponent. His hard work has truly paid off and led to a great deal of success for him. Kevin Owens is another great example of an extremely talented, hard-working, paid his dues kind of wrestler who understands the business inside and out and can go out and entertain every week, fulfill the role that's handed to him, and can do it despite not having the traditional professional wrestler, big, bulky, muscle guy physique. And though it didn't happen right away, I think we can look at Triple H in that same light. He has been such an amazing wrestler across the years. He established himself as a star in WWE at a time when they really didn't have very many. He helped prop the company up for a very long time. He sold like crazy and still does. He sacrifices himself on a regular basis to put over people for the sake of making stars. It's not about him, it's about the business. And I think it's very appropriate that he has become one of the decision makers in WWE and will be one of the people who leads it into the next couple of decades. His work guiding NXT and cultivating that business has done what I don't think any development territory has ever done for WWE before, in producing star after star and a compelling television show in and of itself. But his work and sacrifice across the years has generated a lot of love from the fans because of what he is willing to give. His humility at the time of Ric Flair's retirement and clear recognition that Flair was one of the greatest legends of all time. Also went a long way with the fans. So let's talk about Ric Flair as one of the historical figures, one of the legends that also have generated a lot of love. Yes, he did show up in the booze category before, but he deserves to be in the love category. There are very few wrestlers who are looked at and respected as universally as top shelf professional wrestlers, really probably the greatest ever, as Ric Flair. He's a nice guy. He's likable when you get him out of his character. And even in the context of the character, he's so sympathetic in so many ways. Everybody thinks he's one of the greatest ever, and a big part of that is because the man could make anyone look good. If you look at the success that he had, and then you compare it to his win-loss record, no, wins and losses don't necessarily mean a lot in wrestling, but if you consider the fact that he probably lost easily 2/3 of the matches he was ever in, if not more, that shows how much he was willing to sacrifice, how much he was willing to give up to make whoever he was wrestling look good and to be a success. He was not power hungry. He was not money hungry. He was not someone who had to be over and be in the spotlight. He was someone who was there to make the business work. He came in at a time where that was a much more clear demand on the wrestlers, and he has helped propagate that to a new generation. He is universally loved in the locker room, as I understand it, and though he's butted heads with a few people a couple times along the way, he's someone who is extremely well respected and will continue to be a part of the pro wrestling landscape actively as long as he chooses to be, I believe, but will certainly be considered a legend until all of us are gone. Right there on the heels of that, Shawn Michaels. Shawn was someone who came in and was just another tag team wrestler, but he broke out from the Rockers, found his voice, and really separated himself based on his talent. He got in the ring and did things nobody had ever seen before in that environment. And across the years, he has had such amazing matches with such a wide range of wrestlers and made so many people better. He can walk into WrestleMania and have a 5-star match with just about anybody on the roster. They know they can trust him. They know that he can get anybody over. And in the end, that is the kind of performer that you want to depend on. Shawn is right there and is amazingly well respected. Next, we look at The Rock. No, Dwayne Johnson is not a regular on the WWE roster any longer. He has moved on to bigger and much larger screens, but he is always going to be considered a part of the pro wrestling landscape and always be considered a part of the WWE roster. He had so much talent. He had so much charisma. And at first, he started out receiving a ton of hatred from the crowd. People didn't like him. They didn't like having someone like him shoved down their throat. He was the blue chipper. He was the one that was supposed to be the next generation of great wrestler. Fans don't like that kind of thing very much because they feel like they're being told what to do, what to think, what to believe. The Rock made it cool to be a wrestling fan again in so many ways that no one else on the roster could do at the time in WWF or WCW. And his natural charisma led him to be loved, even though he was a bad guy. He was putting butts in seats, and people were making signs for him, supporting him in the crowd, even when he was a bad guy. That is the kind of reaction that you can't buy. That is what makes a true superstar in the business. And anytime he shows up on a screen, it doesn't matter what the context is. You watch. He's just that naturally charismatic. Mick Foley, also known as Mankind, Cactus Jack, Dude Love. He is someone who sacrificed so much of his own physical well-being for the business that fans were drawn to him. Fans respected what he sacrificed, what he gave up. In truth, he actually sacrificed a lot of his own health and may have sacrificed years off of his life to do what he did in the professional wrestling business, but he loved the business. And to this day, he still wants to be a part of it. In my belief, because he loves it so much, he loves the fans, and he wants to continue giving to it because it's given so much to him. He's not your average wrestler. He never had the bodybuilder physique. He was never the most attractive guy in the world, and at times they tried to play up that he looked ugly, and that was part of what sold him as a heel, as Mankind. But in the end, he loved so much about the business that the fans learned to love him. And it didn't matter what they had him do on the screen, they still cheered him. Steve Austin, a guy by the name of Stone Cold. WCW said he wasn't marketable and fired him by FedEx. Thank you, Eric Bischoff. Thanks to them doing that, that led to the creation of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Yeah, we had the ringmaster for a little while, but his natural charisma finally came out, and there has never been a character that more people in professional wrestling identified with than Stone Cold Steve Austin. His attitude, his defiance, his anti-hero personality hit at a time when American culture was advocating such things. His resistance to the boss, to Vince McMahon, and pushback, constantly defying direction, that kind of thing was so unheard of and so different in the scope of professional wrestling that it just resonated with millions of people. I don't think anyone has ever sold as much merchandise in wrestling as Steve Austin. I don't think anyone has ever brought as many new fans to the business as Steve Austin. And to this day, all of his side projects are so popular, but anytime he sets foot on a WWE stage, fans are captivated. That kind of thing is what you simply cannot buy, much like The Rock. And the fact is, he did almost everything of note in his career after having sustained a broken neck in a WWF ring. You've got to respect that kind of hard work and fortitude that he brought to the business and brought to the ring every night, put on a great show for the fans. When you look at the fact that he almost was forced out of the business because of what happened in WCW and dug his way back up to not only become a star, but to become arguably the most popular star in the history of the business, that right there, that determination is what brings fans to cheer for him, even when he's not a part of the storylines anymore. And last but certainly not least on this category, I'll bring in the legendary manager Bobby the Brain Heenan. Bobby is someone who had so much impact on the business across 5 decades. But what he did better than anyone else is he made stars. He could take someone who was not particularly charismatic or all that interesting as far as the talker goes. As long as they get it done in the ring, Bobby could get them over in interviews. He could go to the ring. He could be a part of the storyline, interject himself in a match, and draw hatred for a bad guy. He was an amazing announcer after he transitioned that direction. He was a talent in the ring when the time warranted, and the reality is there are very few people who have had as much of an impact on so many careers as Bobby Heenan had. Let's flip that around. Let's talk about people who have received and generated hatred in professional wrestling. And when I make the distinction between hatred and boos, I want you to understand clearly that I don't mean that fans boo them when they come out. That may very well happen. But it's not just booing them because they don't like their character or their underhanded tactics. These are people that, to some fans at least, are despicable. People who you wouldn't want to associate with, who in some cases you don't even want to see on your television screen, who you feel like are reasons not to watch professional wrestling. I'll give you some examples. On the roster right now, the most prevalent example is Roman Reigns. There are very few people who are as polarizing as Reigns. Most people either love him or hate him, and there's very few that love him. He does sell some merchandise, but the reality is that whenever he comes to the ring, regardless of the fact that he's being portrayed as a babyface, nearly everything he does gets booed. Hard. Adamantly. To the point where fans groan when he comes onto the stage. He doesn't even make it to the ring before they're booing him. His music hits and they start booing. The promotion shoves him down everyone's throat as a babyface, as the shining star of who they should recognize as good and right in the business. And Reigns gets heat every single time for this hatred. This is very contradictory. It's one of the most contradictory examples in modern wrestling today because the fans so adamantly don't want Reigns on screen. So many fans. Yet WWE continues to push him. Not just push him, but push him as a babyface. It's somewhat puzzling, and we'll discuss that a little bit more later on. Eva Marie, on the women's roster, a very attractive but very minimally talented female wrestler. She would have fit into the WWF a whole lot better 5-6 years ago, when they basically had glorified models walking around and pretending to slap each other in the ring. That was pretty much the mentality of most of their matches. Bra and panties matches, and just silly, sexy things that go on. Today, she's surrounded by the likes of Charlotte, Alexa Bliss, Becky Lynch, Bayley, Sasha Banks, Naomi. Amazingly talented wrestlers, amazingly talented stars with the charisma to actually get themselves over and put on amazing matches in the ring, setting precedents left and right. Somebody like Eva Marie is really just there to take up space and get a few guys' attention. That's about it. And when you're surrounded by women as talented as her, who quite frankly are almost as attractive as her, there's not much room on the roster for that. She needs to move aside and let the real women come in and do the work. Another example is Brock Lesnar. Now, yes, Lesnar sells a lot of merchandise, and yes, there's a lot of people who really get behind him. But fans of the business for a long time, while they respect what he's done in the wrestling business, a lot of them do not appreciate how he comes and goes at a whim, how he changes from WWE to UFC, how he threatens to leave, and how a couple times he has held the promotion hostage or almost held him hostage about events and appearances. He's someone who in real life is a self-acknowledged jerk, someone who you probably wouldn't want to spend a lot of time around. He has been perceived as power hungry on a regular basis, and in the end, he does this for money. He doesn't make any bones about it. And it's not just his character saying that. It's the man behind the scenes. He's made that abundantly clear, both in the WWE and in UFC. Along with this, you got to look at John Cena. I'll be the first to admit that Cena has been a dedicated employee of WWE for his entire career. There are few people who have ever given as much to the business on such a regular basis as he has. He is there working for the company, doing promotional appearances, hosting Saturday Night Live not long ago. Make-A-Wish, I don't think anybody's got more appearances in than him. He has given endlessly to the business. And he has generated a lot of revenue for the company. He has given a lot. He's gotten a lot back, but he's given a tremendous amount. But there are a lot of people who don't like Cena solely for two reasons. One, he's not the greatest in the ring. Two, he's been shoved down their throat, much like I was referring to with Roman Reigns. Cena is someone who was seen as the next Hulk Hogan, the next person to fill that role for a generation, and did so, but did so under duress with many of the fans. Fans did not want to cheer him. Fans did not want to be behind him. And they saw so much of him that they got sick of him. So when you keep having the same thing shoved in front of you on a day in and day out basis, eventually you will grow weary of it. And that's exactly what happened with John Cena. This is to the point where the duality comes out in fans, because when Cena comes out to the ring, literally half the crowd will cheer him, half the crowd will hate him. You get dueling chants in the ring, in the arena, when they say, "Let's go Cena, Cena sucks." Opposite sides of the arena, chanting different things about the same guy at the same time. Finally, WWE has started to acknowledge that a little bit and seems to be teasing a heel turn for Cena. And I think that kind of thing is smart, because they're finally reacting in some way rather than trying to ignore what the fans are saying. We'll get into that a little bit more later. On the historical side of things, let's take a look at a couple of examples of this kind of heat. Hulk Hogan. I will probably do a podcast at some point solely on Hulk Hogan, and it will not be a warm, fuzzy one. I do not respect Hogan. I think he's one of the most calculating and evil people in the business itself, and I don't mean as a character, I mean as a person. That said, we'll leave Terry Bollea out of this and move back to Hulk Hogan. Hogan has used his influence and power in so many different situations to ensure his success, his prominence, stepped on so many people along the way, stabbed people in the back, used his biases to ensure his success at the expense of others rather than helping promote and build the business for the future. He's someone that so many fans see through and have experienced his true personality outside of the ring and outside of the characters he represents, that he genuinely gets a lot of hatred. And I'm very much in agreement with that hatred. Another example is X-Pac, Sean Waltman. I'm not sure how good of a person Sean Waltman is outside of the wrestling business. I can't say I've interacted with him on a regular basis or anything, but he is someone who I think received a great deal of push, a great deal of promotion in the business at times when other people were more deserving of it. He always seemed to be someone on the fringe of the popular and warranted stars, and as a result, he became someone who always seemed to be around but wasn't really a part of the picture. He's one of the few people that made me change the channel back in the late 90s, whether he's on WWF or WCW television. He's someone that could drive away fans with their disdain for simply seeing him on the screen. He didn't even have to talk. He was a talented wrestler and is someone who, in my opinion, was very promising when he was the Lightning Kid and first came in as the 1-2-3 Kid in the WWF. But he stopped, in my opinion, evolving as a wrestler and simply gravitated toward this grungy character that he never evolved past. So he came across as slimy with no redeeming value, and his matches just faltered from there. So he's someone that I definitely think deserved the hatred that he got from fans. There were a lot of other people along the way who received a similar kind of hatred to Hulk Hogan, and they were people who were, to a degree, you might consider coattail riders. People who made a name for themselves, but couldn't sustain that, and they only gained any prominence across a long term because of who their friends were. Usually that was friends of Hulk Hogan. So you look at Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Good gimmick in the late 80s in the WWF, had some charisma, not a talented wrestler, but the only reason he stayed prominent in the wrestling business at all was because of Hogan calling in favors for him, basically extorting opportunities for guys like Beefcake. The Nasty Boys, Brian Knobbs and Jerry Sag, same way. Earthquake, John Tenta. That list is pretty long. But wrestlers getting a push when the fans know they don't deserve it is something that doesn't go over very well nowadays. 20 years ago, it was tolerated a whole lot more because the average fan wasn't as smart as they are now. But today, that just doesn't fly. We're going to take a quick break and be back in just a minute. You're listening to the Dr. Wrestling Podcast. And we're back here on the Dr. Wrestling Podcast talking about heat and how wrestlers can get it. We've talked about the different kinds of heat that a wrestler can hope for. Anything's better than crickets. But I think it's important that we sit down and consider the value of heat, not just for a wrestler getting over, but the importance of what it means to the business. A lot of people tend to lose sight of the fact that heat, whether it's boos, cheers, love, hate, whatever it is, proves the involvement and clearly indicates the support of fans for the wrestling business. The promotions do try to dictate who the fans will cheer and who they'll boo. They try to have an impact on that and try to guide it. Clearly, they see financial implications to certain people being promoted, certain people maybe not flying up the roster and being in the main event. But when it comes down to it, this is a business, and without the fans, you don't have a business. You don't make money. The WWF, WWE, TNA, WCW, Ring of Honor, every major promotion has experienced downturns, periods in their history where the fans' lack of interest in their product cost them dearly, and most promotions go out of business exactly for that reason. It's not for making stupid business decisions. It's because there aren't butts in seats. There aren't people there watching the shows. There are not people tuning in from home. People are not buying the merchandise. People are not buying into your product and helping sustain it. Wrestling fans are an extremely loyal group of fans. They are extremely tenacious, and many fans don't just love certain characters, they love the business. And I'm not just talking about older fans who have come to appreciate the nuances of it. Even kids and everything in between, men, women, it doesn't matter. There are people who love the business. They appreciate the entertainment of it, and they appreciate how hard the performers work to entertain them on a regular basis. They appreciate the sacrifices. They appreciate the time and work that goes into it. Most versions of entertainment don't really have that kind of loyal fan base. Something like Star Wars certainly does. Wrestling fans are the kind of people who may very well, skip a couple of meals along the way to be able to afford their WWE Network subscription. I've known plenty of people who, missed a car payment to be able to buy a pay-per-view back in the 90s. It's the kind of thing where there's a loyalty factor that many other sports and forms of entertainment just have a hard time capturing. What I'm trying to emphasize is that the loyalty of those fans is extremely rare and extremely important to the scope of the business. And in that, those are your diehards. Those are the people that will keep coming back. But there are limits to that. There are times whenever people get so fed up with the product, what it's become, that they will choose to leave the business. Though they may not be the people, in front of the camera putting on the show themselves, they still feel a part of it. And whenever they dislike the product enough, they can choose to walk away. Back in 2006, 2007 time frame, I became fed up enough with WWE's product that I basically quit watching their show. I dove heavy into TNA, into Ring of Honor, into the nostalgia of WCW and some of the older WWF programming, and decided that that's what I wanted to remember wrestling as, and pretty much stopped watching the current product because it got very much on my nerves. It was misrepresenting what I believe wrestling to be. The recurring use of John Cena, of Randy Orton, of Dave Bautista, of Triple H, this revolving door of those four guys coming in and out, constantly being in the main event of every show, and no one else really getting a chance to rise and make their mark in the business, proved that they weren't interested in making new stars. And over time, the business suffered. Everyone suffered for it, including the WWE roster. It was too shallow. And when a couple of injuries hit and they could no longer sustain that repeated pattern of main eventers, they lost a lot of their fan base. But thankfully, they've seen fit to change their approach and turn that around, and that included and resulted in me coming back to the business and becoming a much bigger fan of their products. They've hired some people who were very deserving talents and, quite frankly, deserve to be in the main event as opposed to some of the people they've been pushing for years. But in the end, I think there's a tremendous amount of value for the promotion in listening to the fans. Not only to avoid alienating them, to avoid angering them and driving them away, but because those fans are the same people who have been with the promotion for decades, the same people who have been loyal followers. And yes, you have to change things up. Yes, you have to evolve, and you have to make sure that you stay fresh and current. But at the same time, there are people out there who spend a lot of money on these products, on the wrestling audience participation. To be a part of it is an important thing to them. And those people are the ones that you need to listen to as much as anyone else to understand what resonates with your crowd. Some audiences are simply more vocal than others, but in the end, if you consistently see someone getting a reaction, it's a smart play for the promotion to listen to that. Not knee-jerk and change plans on in the middle of a show, or if you're in the middle of a program, to change direction just because somebody gets booed a lot or somebody gets cheered a lot. The reality is these fans are there, and it is in their interest for the fans to be heard because they can help set the direction. They know what people will listen to, what resonates with them, and they are expressing their voice for a reason. Whenever the promotion consistently enough ignores that voice, eventually those fans will stop talking. And that is the last thing that any promotion wants. Because when a fan is no longer interested, they don't want to see the good guy win. They don't want to see the bad guy get beat. They don't care. is the worst thing that can happen to a promotion. And unfortunately, there are certain people being pushed right now where the fans are eventually going to burn out and say, we don't care anymore, we're going to change the channel. They need to listen. Examples where the promotion has actually succeeded because they listen to the fans. We look back at the early 2000s where after WCW had closed, there was a big influx of WCW talent. These two guys had already been with the WWF at the time, but they were recognized finally for the first time in their careers for the talents that they were, despite their size. Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero. Both are deceased now, and obviously Benoit's story was a very tragic one. I still believe that both he and Eddie made a tremendous mark on the business and deserve an amazing amount of respect for that. As hard as they worked, you look at somebody like Triple H, who was willing to work with those guys and put them over, despite leaders in the previous era like Hulk Hogan absolutely refusing to even get in the ring with them. Shawn Michaels did the same thing. I mean, these guys all recognized the talent that Benoit and Guerrero brought to the ring, the charisma that they brought to the arena, and the fans appreciated everything that they brought to the table as wrestlers. And the promotion really benefited from the shot in the arm that they got by promoting these guys. A more modern incarnation of that was Daniel Bryan. Bryan Danielson was a huge star outside of the WWE, was brought in and treated as an up-and-comer, which obviously was a joke to any knowledgeable wrestling fan at the time. But his character as Daniel Bryan was so loved and adored by the fans, and he was so anti-authority at the time that they made it apparent that the powers that be, Triple H, Stephanie McMahon, whoever, were trying to keep Daniel down, that it played out to be a storyline that the fans got amazingly behind. And to this day, every time he appears on WWE programming, the fans still pop for him and chant, even though he hasn't wrestled in a couple of years. The emphasis that wrestling fans can give to a show can change its direction, even within a given episode of a show. But fans can be fickle. Fans can turn on someone very quickly. But by and large, their voice is very valuable to the promotion, and seeing the impact that their voice can have on the way it's played out in the current generation gives me a lot of hope that we've got people in charge now who are listening. And I think it's going to make for a better product. It already has, in my opinion, and will continue to do so. Not just in WWE, but in TNA or Impact Wrestling and in Ring of Honor. So let's discuss what makes a superstar. We've talked about the kind of reactions that people get from the crowd, but we haven't really talked about why they get it, other than some of their tactics or things they choose to say or do. Sometimes, sociopolitical influences have something to do with it. Sometimes it's social trends. Sometimes it's politics. Sometimes it's just pop culture. Sometimes someone capitalizes on something in pop culture and is able to become relevant because of that. Sometimes it's size. There's a long history in the wrestling business, particularly in the WWF or WWE, that huge guys, abnormally large people, are pushed. Talented or not, they get over and get a lot of screen time. Amazing examples of that would be Andre the Giant, arguably the greatest spectacle in the history of professional wrestling, King Kong Bundy, The Big Show, Paul White, Yokozuna, The Undertaker himself, Elegante, the great Khali, and a more modern example, Big Cass. Of all of them, clearly Big Cass is the best talker. The Undertaker is a very compelling character and has been for 26 years. Yokozuna was a good wrestler. Big Show works extremely hard for the business and has clearly given a lot of himself and sacrificed a lot. King Kong Bundy was never a great wrestler. He just played his role well. Elegante was a horrible wrestler and was only utilized because he was injured when playing for the Atlanta Hawks, and Ted Turner decided to put him to use in the wrestling business. And the great Khali, well, seems to be a nice guy, but let's just say he didn't run circles around anyone in the ring. But that's not to say there's not a lot of value in the spectacle that a very large man can bring to the ring. On the ladies' side of things, in the women's division, WWE has Nia Jax. TNA Impact made very good use of Awesome Kong along those same lines, and there are many examples of larger women across the years who had a big impact in the business. In addition to size, sometimes it's about athletic ability, and very often, therefore, the antithesis of size. The best example of that, in my opinion, is Rey Mysterio Jr. Rey was a very small guy. He pioneered a lot of what we see as cruiserweights in modern wrestling, although it was more of a luchador style coming out of Mexico. But he was charismatic and generated a heck of a following, both with the fans and in ratings, live and on television. Eddie Guerrero, again, very charismatic for a small guy, but amazing technical talent. Chris Jericho, whom we discussed at length earlier, and Daniel Bryan. Athletic ability is what a lot of people identify with. They see through the veil of the business and recognize real talent when they see it. Another huge factor in it, and ultimately what sells merchandise, is charisma. Enzo Amore is an absolutely phenomenal example of charisma. He's so smart, witty, dynamic on the microphone that people will tune in just to hear him. The fact that he has a match afterwards is almost secondary to his presence on the screen. The Ultimate Warrior, never a technical master, but someone who really generated a lot of attention. His physique was amazing, and in the end, he sold a lot of merchandise and a lot of tickets because people wanted to see what he was going to do. The Honky Tonk Man, very much in the business for his charisma, prominent and successful because of his charisma in generating hatred. $1 Million Man Ted DiBiase is another great example of that. Just because you're charismatic doesn't mean people necessarily love you for it. And probably the most pure example of charisma in the business, whether it be for love or hate, was the Macho Man Randy Savage. He was different enough, he was polarizing, but in the end, whether he was a good guy or a bad guy, you always wanted to see what Savage was going to do, and you always wanted to hear what he had to say. It was almost an overload when he became a member of the commentary team in the early 90s in the WWF, because he's someone whose every word you hung on all the time. So to have him announcing throughout a show was almost overkill. It was almost an overload. And quite frankly, one huge factor of success in wrestling, in my opinion, is physique. Whether we like it or don't like it, appearance goes a long way in this business. And some examples of amazing physiques are, well, we mentioned the Ultimate Warrior, who clearly got over, at least initially, because of his physique and his personality. Lex Luger, the total package. He was called that for a reason. He was a talented wrestler. Never going to be the technician that a lot of his contemporaries were, but he was such an attractive and well-defined, muscular guy that he got a lot of attention everywhere he went, no matter what he did. Never really lived up to the potential that a lot of people saw in him, but in the end, his physique played a huge role in his success. Scott Steiner, particularly during the era of Big Papa Pump, that gimmick. All about muscle, all about physique, and he sold it so well that people believed it. And the most prominent example of physique getting over with people has to be Hulk Hogan. He sold the gimmick of the 24-inch pythons and everything about that character so well, and his physique is what helped identify him as a wrestler and helped expand professional wrestling into pop culture in that era. So you saw a figure of a wrestler. Very often people still to this day assume it might be Hulk Hogan. Well, we've talked a lot today about what it takes to be a successful professional wrestler, to get the push, to get the promotional engine of the company behind you. We've talked about how to get heat and the different successes people have experienced across so many different platforms in professional wrestling. I'd like to suggest a couple of examples of things that you could go search and find, and I'll provide links in the notes of this podcast. The first one is Triple H's return from injury in January of 2012. Triple H had been out for quite a while due to a quadriceps injury and had worked so hard to help prop up the promotion during a period where they had so little success and so few stars. He, The Rock, Mankind and The Undertaker were pretty much the bedrock of the WWF through that point. And when he went down with injury after working so hard for so long, fans really gained an appreciation for what he had given to the business. So when he returned to Monday Night Raw, it was an explosive response. And this is an example of love. Good guy or bad guy doesn't matter at this point. There's not much they could have done to had him come out and get booed. He was going to get cheered. They knew it, but the reaction he got was through the roof and stronger than anything they could have expected. The next example I'd like to give you is the Monday Night Raw that occurred immediately following Ric Flair's retirement at WrestleMania in 2008. Flair had retired after losing a match to Shawn Michaels, and that Monday Night Raw was largely dedicated to Flair's retirement and to the business saying thank you and giving something back to a man who had sacrificed so much and had given so much of himself on very personal levels to the business of professional wrestling. Never before have I seen such an outpouring of love and respect shown to another wrestler on TV. It was just a cavalcade of stars, and people came out to demonstrate respect for Flair that normally don't take part in anything like that, any kind of demonstration of respect, including Vince McMahon himself and even The Undertaker. Very atypical for him, especially with his character. So I highly recommend that you look those up. I'll provide you links to them. I highly recommend that you check them out on the WWE Network. That is a very worthwhile subscription, especially for someone who's a huge fan of both modern and classic professional wrestling, as I am. So if you get a chance, go check them out on the network. If not, if you don't have access to the WWE Network, I'll provide you some links where you can get to them anyway. But hopefully you'll find some examples of exactly the different kinds of heat and reaction that a wrestler can get. And when it's all said and done, you want to make sure that you understand what qualities bring a wrestler to that level of success, because when you see it, it helps you understand why someone is where they are, and you can choose to make them an even bigger star with your vote, with your viewership, with your dollars. And if you love the business, you want to see those kind of people succeed. That's about it for the second edition of the Dr. Wrestling Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed the discussion about heat in professional wrestling and all the different reactions a professional wrestler can hope to generate. We appreciate you listening with us, and look forward to hearing from you and some feedback about what you thought about the show and how we can make improvements. And hopefully we'll have a new episode online here for you very soon and keep these kind of discussions going. Thanks again for listening to the Dr. Wrestling Podcast, and just remember, keep watching and keep believing. It doesn't have to be real, it just has to mean something. Good night, everybody.